this week's program. We're going to be talking to a Northland farmer and also get the latest gen as far as broadband is concerned. But in just a moment, we'll be talking wool. Malcolm, what are the markets doing?
Pretty good at the moment, Rob. We've had a relatively good season compared to last year. Levels have been consistently higher through the whole season. We're starting to see now where some sectors are starting to drop back to where they were last year, in particular the fine crossbred sector, which is mainly the Chinese market. Their activity since Christmas has just been a bit sluggish. They're starting to get back into it again now, but you've seen big pressure on their types leading up to Christmas, and then it has just sort of slowly slipped off. The coarse wool sector has been holding fairly well, and at the moment the crossbred wools, the coarse crossbred wools, your carpet types, are around about 14% higher than where they were this time last year. Lamb's wool also has done fairly well until just recently, as the wool gets coarser. Mm-hmm. Anything below 30 micron, finer than 30 micron, has had a bumper season for price. Once you get past 30 micron, it gets a little bit harder to trade. You need to get more length to it, so you've got to get a 2 to 4 block 3 inch or longer, and then those wools can move into the combing sector. And there's quite a lot of those around because there's been quite a bit of feed. So that sector has actually brought back the average price overall. And saying that, anything finer than 29 micron is still fetching very, very good prices.
So that length means that we're going back to once a year rather than 3 times in 2 years?
Not so much in lamb's wool, it's just the seasonal growth of lamb's wool. They start shearing, say, for around December, January, and then you only get 1 to 3, 2 to 3 inch wools, and they tend to be finer because they're younger wools. And then as the season goes on and the lambs get larger, yep, the follicle opens up more, they're eating more, and they produce a coarser wool. So as the season goes on, their wool goes to, probably lamb's wool only doesn't go past about 3 to 4, 3 to 5 inches in a season. After that, they turn into what we call woolly hoggets and will grow out to 4 to 6 inch. But there's not much of that happening in the country now. Most people shear their lambs as lambs. And in fact, this year, because it was so hot in the lamb market, the lambs were shorn early, and then within the first 12 months, those lambs were shorn again. So you ended up getting second shear lambs as well. And their microns were also under a lot of pressure at that stage, because there was what they call the face-to-face business for the fashion of collars on winter jackets. And that was big in China this year. So farmers
a bit of fashion coming into it.
In the crossbred sector, which is unusual. You think of it in merino and mid-micron, but not so much in the coarser sector of wools. And of course, lamb's wool slips between two areas quite nicely. It can move into things like woolen blankets and things like this jacket and infill for the inside of jackets as well as into some of the fine apparels and fine sweaters. So.
It's a supply, because that's a major part of what you're doing, isn't it?
It is, and this year has been rather erratic. There's been the same amount of wool as we would have expected come on the market, which is just a little bit off last year's volumes, but the timing of it has been a little bit different to what we were expecting, and that has helped keep some of the pressure in the market, because as exporters we have to anticipate supply against the demand from our customers and sell on a forward basis. So we're selling out 2 to 3 months ahead on what will be coming onto the market in a month or two's time, and some of it hasn't come on when we expected it. So that creates a supply imbalance against what is sold, and that has kept the steam in underneath the market. Now, since Christmas through January, February, March, and even into April is our high flow period for wool, and that again is contributing to a certain degree why some of the prices have dropped off. The other factor that actually helped hold our prices is the weakness in the New Zealand dollar against the basket of currencies. So
you've been waiting for that, haven't you?
Yes, and from an exporter's point of view, a weak currency, New Zealand currency, is actually a good thing, because it helps us with our exports as well. So we're for the four main trading currencies in the wool sector, which is the US, the Australian dollar, the euro and sterling, that basket of currency is around about 10% less than where we were this time last year. So that's another factor that's helped our price levels this year.
Now, preparation, is there any loopholes there? Because some people sort of still treat it as a byproduct.
They do, and it's difficult for us to argue to farmers in coarse wools to really do their preparation strongly when they see prices all much the same for poor wools, poorly prepared wools, or good wools. But what we have to do as exporters is we have to take the different components and actually put some of them back together again to meet a market requirement for certain types. So if the offline wools aren't removed and left in with the good wools, farmer might get still quite a good relative price, but they minimise the options for us to be able to meet the market demand and produce consistent products. The biggest thing with preparation this year has been that the season has been fairly good for growing perspective, so you haven't had as many of the off-colour bellies and pieces discoloured from the main body wool. So there's been more of what would have generally gone into what we call the oddments has been able to be left onto the main fleece. So we generally think we're going to get around about 10% of what is shorn off an animal as an oddment factor, and we haven't been getting that this year because they just haven't been poor enough to be taken off the fleece.
That's good though, isn't it?
It's good from a farming perspective. From an export perspective of us having to make products, it has put pressure on those oddment types. So farmers are actually getting quite good prices for what would be termed offline wools or their oddment types. What you're seeing now though is a gap start to open up because the weather has changed in a lot of areas. We're now getting far more discoloration in main body lines, we're getting far more oddments, and you're starting to see that price gap open up quite a lot. So it is becoming more important now that the types are separated out. The other biggest factor we're seeing is a huge increase in vegetable matter content in wool. And in combing wools, which are 3 to 5 inch and longer, it goes on machinery where it gets combed a lot, and a lot of that seed can be removed. When it's shorter than 3 to 5, so 3 to 4, 2 to 4, 2 to 3 and shorter, it goes on what we call a woolen processing system, minimal combing. So we have minimal opportunity to remove that seed. Right. And seed in woolen types is a big no-no.
Malcolm, thank you very much indeed. In just a moment, we'll be looking at how to get the very best out of your soil and out of your fertiliser budget. Sergio, very, very important is our soil, and we're a bit inclined to overlook it.
Definitely. I think that we rely on soils to feed ourselves, and it's part of our legacy, and if we want it to survive, we have to take care of it. And I think farmers need to understand that it's an alive medium. It's not just a place to put things, but that it's a living, breathing organism.
We overlook, I guess, a lot of what happens under the ground. Can you explain a wee bit about what we're overlooking as far as we need those microbits to feed the grass, to feed the animals, and come back in again?
Sure. So microorganisms make up a bulk majority of what's in soils, and those organisms play a role in those soils. We tend to think about this relationship as plants are consuming nutrients, but we're missing the point that there's a relationship with all of the microbes that are in there, and it's an entire community, and it works as a system. So in order to make the system work and work efficiently, we need to account for those microbes that carry out the processes that under a normal ecosystem would be provided by the organisms that are in the soils.
Tell me about your story about the termites and the cattle.
Oh, so essentially I was trying to make the point of how we have evidence of how microbes are the engines that transform raw materials into materials that can be used by other organisms. And it's a repetitive sort of story that's found in the world. If you look at living organisms, their guts are full of microorganisms that turn nutrients into forms that can be taken up by that host. And soils work in the exact same way. Those organisms in the soils are the engines that make the nutrients available for the plants. So it's almost like it's the stomach of the world.
So a termite doesn't actually get nutrient out of the timber it eats?
No, it doesn't. So the termite is actually feeding that wood to the organisms in its stomach, who then produce sugars and amino acids that the termite can then take up.
And the same thing with dairying, I guess, with grass.
Yep. So it's one of the areas of research that people are paying a lot of attention to now. It's the fact that when you feed an animal, in this case a cow, the organisms in the rumen will actually break down that feed and produce volatile fatty acids that the cow then takes up, and that's what ends up in milk and meat.
Sergio, I guess we should identify what is in the soil and what's not, rather than a blanket NPK.
Yeah, and that's what we're trying to do in my lab. It's identify the organisms that are present in different types of soils so that we can understand who's there and what is their role. And hopefully by making that connection, we can target how to manipulate individual groups of organisms for the benefit of either an ecosystem or a farmer.
We've still got lots more for you here on The Land. In just a moment, we'll be back.
Be Active begins here in the cold, clean, unpolluted southern oceans of New Zealand. Be Active amino acid biostimulant, natural, 100% pure, manufactured from healthy deep sea fish from sustainable New Zealand fisheries. New Zealand's Be Active amino acid biostimulant, the way the world is growing. Working with nature, good for the plant, good for the planet. Now that's growing for good.
I've been reporting on farming matters on the radio and newspapers and on television for 40 or so years, but communication, like farming, has moved on. So we've come up with On the Land, online and through YouTube on any screen, anytime and anywhere. Just push play and see and hear what's happening today in our rural community. You'll learn and be informed about the latest and best information farming matters. On the Land, bringing farming information into the 21st century. So join us on our website, ontheland.co.nz.
You know that saying, content is king? Well, in today's mixed media world, it's true. You need video, audio, photos and more for social media, for marketing, for communications, sales and for advertising. And you need this at a price that works with your budgets. Well, that's what we do. At Tandem, we partner with you to create the content that you can use to shout to the world or video link to a few. Connect with us and we'll help you connect to the world.
We're living on a planet facing almost insurmountable challenges. Challenges we have to face sooner rather than later. The world needs our energy. She needs our ideas, our passion. It's up to us to change things, make a positive change to the planet, to feed the world, to protect the future, to live well, to be the generation that will make a change. Join us.
Minister, the importance of broadband.
Look, I've become such a convert and an evangelist almost for broadband, Rob. It's so critical to our future, and particularly when you think about the rural areas. They haven't been well served with broadband in the past, and I think we're going to see this incredible transformation in rural New Zealand. I mean, if you think just staffing alone, it's hard to get anyone under the age of sort of 30 to do anything if they haven't got good instant data, if they can't Facebook and text and Skype and be in touch with the rest of the world. So getting staff out to rural areas, we know broadband's important. We know it's important for communicating with bankers and suppliers and the like. But where it gets really interesting is when you see some of the on-farm technology developments, whether it's precision-based agriculture, GPS, fertiliser and ploughing, but even what's called the machine-to-machine communication. So increasingly we're seeing so many on-farm applications using real-time sensors monitoring and talking back to base camp, if you like. So you can have a farm owner in their office, frankly on the farm or the other side of the world, monitoring real-time production, animal health, grass cover, water levels, effluent pond, stock movements, staffing hours, and not only being able to keep very good tabs on what's happening on the farm, but also as a very valuable business tool to plan and to progress. And quite apart from that, you've got suddenly access for our children in small rural schools getting access to the best information in the world. You know, the school of 30 kids who can now offer Mandarin classes or advanced physics, and they never would have had the ability to do that. And then you get into health, it just gets better. And some of the things I see in health now that are set up to allow people to stay in their own homes as elderly people and have real-time monitoring of their health conditions rather than have to go away out of the community and into hospitals and into rest homes. So it really is going to, I think, transform and revitalise rural communities, and that's why we're so passionate to get broadband out to almost everyone in New Zealand.
Is there a bit of a hang-up with people who don't think they can get broadband because they haven't looked at the new systems?
Yeah, look, that's right. So what we get a lot of is people thinking if they can't get broadband through their old copper phone line, then they haven't got broadband. The reality is these days broadband comes in many shapes and forms, and in rural New Zealand one of the most effective ways we're getting broadband out to people is through what we call fixed wireless. So effectively that means off a cell phone tower, a signal goes from the tower to a little dish or aerial on your roof and then feeds down into your house in the normal way. And I have so many people writing to me in my office saying, oh, you know, I've got lousy broadband, and they're just using the same old connection they've had for 20 years. And when we say to them, hey, did you know you can get RBI fixed wireless, and when they realise that they get a speed increase of 10, 20, 50%. You know, I've got one business, Robin, well there's more, but one business in the Bay of Islands wrote to me the other day telling us that off their fixed wireless connection under the RBI program, they're getting speeds equivalent of having a fibre connection into their house. So 100 megabits a second for those techies who follow along with that, but that's world-leading fibre-like speeds off these fixed wireless towers. So it's an incredibly good service. But, you know, I do get frustrated because I know there's so many people still dealing with very, very slow, long copper lead-in off their phone lines and wondering why they've got such lousy broadband. So my first suggestion would be go to broadbandmap.org.nz, put in your address, and it will tell you what broadband is available at your house, what your options are, and be prepared to try a new sort of connection. You might be surprised what you can already get.
So literally it's a case of a lot of people don't have it or don't think they have it because they just don't know about it.
Yeah, that's right. They haven't sort of thought that there are other options. They still think the only way to get broadband is through your phone line coming into the house. And actually the options are many and varied. Even over, your straight cellular connection through your phone now, you can get much cheaper, much better data and broadband than people have been used to. But even in the very remotest parts of New Zealand, if you can get absolutely nothing else, there are usually some satellite options. And they get a bit more expensive, but when you've had nothing, something's pretty good. So first lesson, check what you can get. Be prepared to try something new and try a new provider. And if it's not quite to you yet, it's coming soon. We're a long way through the rollout of the first stage of our broadband programs. So probably people hopefully are aware that we've been doing both what we call UFB, which is in the built-up urban areas. That covers about 75% of New Zealanders so far. And then we're doing the RBI, which is the rural program that sits alongside it. And that RBI is about 87% complete through stage one. And that will take this high-speed broadband out to 97.8% of us, which is great. But actually we're not stopping there. We want to now go on and take that even further. So we're taking fibre, UFB, out to 80% of all New Zealanders. And that's not just the big cities. That's towns like Tokoroa and Oamaru and Ashburton and Blenheim. And so it really gets into our regional communities. But outside that, we also want to go further and faster. So we're putting another 150 million into RBI, which will take that rural broadband out even further and even faster.
Changing the subject, I guess a lot of people are picking on dairying at the moment, but it's got far-reaching effects on a lot of people.
Yeah, it is. So obviously I'm the MP for Selwyn. It's a big rural community, and what I've been seeing certainly in my electorate is that the dairy price dropping is having a flow-through effect right through the agriculture sector. And I think this is something that isn't possibly getting enough airtime, which is that there probably isn't a mixed farming operation in New Zealand that isn't affected by the low dairy prices. So what I mean by that is that the arable farmers who are growing feed grain are finding it sitting in their silos, not getting away, and suddenly the market is just almost gone overnight for some of their product. The sheep and crop farmers are often providing some dairy support or growing a standing feed crop to support the dairy farmers, and that's, as I say, either gone or cut right back. So while the dairy prices are what everyone's focused on and the impact on dairy farmers, actually that financial effect flows right through the agriculture sector. And then, of course, if it affects the agriculture sector, it flows into our small towns. So every business in our small rural towns will certainly feel the effect. I notice that some of our machinery suppliers, for example, are cutting their prices significantly because nothing's moving. So we are going to see, I think, an effect right through the ag sector. On the upside, there are a number of other sectors that are really having very good, strong seasons. So, fisheries are very good. Wine is going incredibly well for New Zealanders. The beef schedule has still been good. I know it's more North Island, but kiwi fruit is flying along. Tourism numbers have gone through the roof. So while there's certainly some tough times on the farm and right through those rural communities, it's important to remember that there are a number of sectors that are doing really well, and so there's reason to be positive, but still tough times for those in core agriculture.
So it's two sides to the coin.
Two sides to the coin, and look, there always are, and that's why it's important that New Zealand has such a diverse economy. And so, going back to where I was, technology is pretty important to making sure that we have a number of options. Now you can run a global business from anywhere in New Zealand, so perhaps if the times are a bit tight, it might be time to think about some other options.
Ruth, to start, if we may, employment's becoming a big issue.
So Labor has recognised that this really has to be a big bit of policy work that we lead. The current government doesn't seem interested at all in looking at what the future will hold for people and how we prepare people for that. We know that the labour market is really different now than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. People change their job much more often. We've got a benefit system that doesn't recognise that, and we've got a training system that doesn't recognise that. So we're leaving our current and future workforce unprepared for what they might face. So we're doing a lot of work in this space. We've got some experts from around the country and internationally who are helping us with that, looking at how we can make sure that even if people have to change jobs, that they're able to do that, they're able to get into training, get on a path of a new career, even if that one might not be permanent, without the significant interruptions they currently have.
Is that going to take a lot of work?
We've been doing a lot of work around it already. There's just been a big conference this week, and hopefully we'll be able to come out with some next position papers over the next 3 to 6 months.
Now, dairying is obviously going to drop a whole lot of people onto the labour market as well.
What's happening in the dairy industry is really sad, and I know that some people are being quite cynical in their response, and I don't agree with that. I think that people who have invested heavily in dairy have put their own lives on the line, and that we should, as a nation, be there to support them when things go wrong. Nobody anticipated the plummet in dairy payments that we're currently experiencing, and it doesn't look as if this is an issue that's going to come right in the short term. Maybe not even in the long term. We've got a lot more suppliers of milk than we had in the past. Our competition is fiercer, and there just isn't the capacity to absorb that amount of milk internationally. What Labor said to the government was that this isn't just about the dairy farmers, but that's significant enough. The flow-on impact on our towns and cities from having that reduction in cash is huge. It's one of the biggest challenges our economy has faced. We think there is a role for government to work alongside the banks, to work alongside the training organisations to say, what is going to happen to these people in the financial predicament they're in. We approached the government and said, there is a bit of a crisis in the dairy industry. You should put your hand up to help, and they said no. I think that was the wrong response. So if we've got 100,000 small businesses who are going to be directly impacted to the point of closure because of the dairy crisis, then this is a situation the government should be actively involved in.
So what do you suggest should happen? I mean, are you talking tax cuts or what?
That's probably quite a blunt end solution. We need to look at the individual circumstances that dairy farmers are in, and probably how many of them might need to diversify and what support they could be given for that. If dairy isn't going to be sustainable long term, why would we prop them up now? Some of them will have to come to the realisation that there isn't a future in that business. A lot of the banks are only doing short-term fixes. That's not going to help. A lot of them are saying you can have a mortgage break, but by the way, we're going to keep on putting on the interest in the meantime. That's not going to help them longer term either. So if the money isn't going to be there for them in their current business, and it's going to have a huge impact on the New Zealand economy, there should be a role for government to step in and support them.
And of course Landcorp have led by example by not doing a big dairy conversion.
Absolutely, that was thank goodness, a sensible decision they made. They almost went into dairying, which I thought was a very unusual role for them to be taking, but they've seen the error of that proposal and made a wiser solution. That might be the answer for a lot of our dairy farmers.
Now TPP is still rattling around the hills.
Well, there's a roadshow going on around the country at the moment to explain to people more details about the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. Labor's always been the party that supports trade. We know that that's the only way that our economy can survive. We haven't got enough people in New Zealand to consume all the products that we want to manufacture. So we're strong supporters of trade, but the TPP is more than just a trade deal. It has a lot of other fishhooks in it that we think were unnecessary. Other countries got exemptions from the things that we are saying the New Zealand government should not have signed up to. So this wasn't a deal breaker. We could have had better protection for farming. We could have had provision that we could make our own laws so that, for example, we could say a non-New Zealand resident cannot buy residential property here. Other countries have done it and still signed up to the TPP, but this government chose not to go down that path. The benefits of TPP are great for those who will benefit from it. We support that, but the downsides are just too much for us. So we'll be opposing the legislation. Quite unusual for Labor to oppose a trade deal, but as I say, this is much more than just a trade deal.
So if you became the government, would you not sign it?
It should be over and done by then. We want to retain the right to make our sovereign law in New Zealand. The TPP threatens that. We're still not clear on the details of FARMAC. If the patent lasts longer, as the Americans are saying it does under TPP, that will be 3 years more that New Zealanders will have to wait until we can get generic drugs on our market. The reason that our drugs are so cheap through FARMAC compared to many other countries is because we've got that 5-year limit on brand drugs. So we want to retain that until we see the final shape of what is signed by all the countries. America still has to go through that process, and they've got their own elections to go through before then, so we don't know where it's going to end up. But we won't comply with the parts of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement that we don't agree with.
Yeah, and that is the other thing I was going to ask you. What's likely to happen as far as New Zealand is concerned, whatever the situation is with the United States elections?
Well, I guess I'm as surprised as many people are, not just in New Zealand but around the world, that it looks like Donald Trump could be the next president of the United States. Heaven only knows what that will mean, actually. It's really hard to imagine how much of the things he says he will do that he would actually do, or what other ideas he might come up with, and I don't know what the presidential election, regardless of whether it's Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, will mean for the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement.
Straight after the break, we're going to be talking to Dennis Carter, and he's got some pretty big revelations, so catch him in a moment.
Be Active begins here in the cold, clean, unpolluted southern oceans of New Zealand. Be Active amino acid biostimulant, natural, 100% pure, manufactured from healthy deep sea fish from sustainable New Zealand fisheries. New Zealand's Be Active amino acid biostimulant, the way the world is growing. Working with nature, good for the plant, good for the planet. Now that's growing for good.
I've been reporting on farming matters on the radio and newspapers and on television for 40 or so years, but communication, like farming, has moved on. So we've come up with On the Land, online and through YouTube on any screen, anytime and anywhere. Just push play and see and hear what's happening today in our rural community. You'll learn and be informed about the latest and best information farming matters. On the Land, bringing farming information into the 21st century. So join us on our website, ontheland.co.nz.
You know that saying, content is king? Well, in today's mixed media world, it's true. You need video, audio, photos and more for social media, for marketing, for communications, sales and for advertising. And you need this at a price that works with your budgets. Well, that's what we do. At Tandem, we partner with you to create the content that you can use to shout to the world or video link to a few. Connect with us and we'll help you connect to the world.
We're living on a planet facing almost insurmountable challenges. Challenges we have to face sooner rather than later. The world needs our energy. She needs our ideas, our passion. It's up to us to change things, make a positive change to the planet, to feed the world, to protect the future, to live well, to be the generation that will make a change. Join us.
Dennis, you're a grain farmer, but you've got some pretty strong ammunition about why we should be feeding grain.
Absolutely, Rob. I just heard this last week that the average empty dairy cows in the South Island is 16%. Now, by anybody's language, that is a very, very expensive thing to have to carry on your farm if you're a dairy farmer, is empty cows. And so you'll be carrying those basically for a year, eating food, and they're no use to you, no productivity whatsoever.
Well, most of them will have their heads cut off.
Well, some of them will, and in fact farmers have been encouraged by their bankers and accountants and people like that to actually look into their herds earlier on and to cull those doubtful cows, those older ones, the ones that are not performing, who farmers measure their cows so they know which ones are and aren't, and they should be gone. So these empty cows that are still on farm now are some of the better stock, which is quite a shame. Now farmers will probably have a choice now with these empty ones, yes, to cut their heads off or to carry them eating grass for another year. Now, surely some of that has been brought about by perhaps the feeding of palm kernel, which is just good for keeping cows alive in a drought and keeping grain farmers honest.
Yes.
And at the moment, grain farmers are very honest.
Very
because,
honest, yeah.
The
exactly.
prices come right back, and they've got a really powerful product there, a really good feed, and dairy farmers know this, but of course with the cash outflow and so forth for buying it, have been encouraged to produce on farm or not to have the money go out. So perhaps this is a risk analysis that dairy farmers will have to do and say, well, okay, maybe there is a case with the price of grain at the moment to strategically feed the animals this high protein, high quality feed, wheat and barley, to bring my herd up. And I think it's something that I once remember when grain prices were very, very low. A Lincoln College lecturer, John Lay, talking to cropping farmers about the risk of not using nitrogen on wheat crops. And he was able to prove a case where the money spent on growing those crops properly with nitrogen was a risk mitigation rather than going in and risking a low yielding crop. So these are the sorts of things that perhaps some dairy farmers need to look at and say, okay, let's have a look at the big picture. Let's just not get insular and do everything on our farms and think we've got everything, because you don't have top producing grass and pastures all year round when you need them. So what I'm advocating is the strategic feeding of grain to help with the mating process.
So you're advocating that it's the lack of nutrients, if you like, in palm kernel compared to grain?
Well, possibly, and even low quality pasture. It's just not good enough to flush those cows up. And as our old mate Jerry Stone used to talk about, a rising plane of nutrition.
Indeed, because that's what you need.
Absolutely, yeah, approaching mating time, and it's all about ovulation, and there are some other factors, of course, you know, there's seasonal factors, there's
That 16%, Dennis, is that an average?
that's an average for the South Island, and some herds I've heard of up to 35% of empty cows. Now that is horrific. That is soul destroying for a dairy farmer.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
Changing the subject, now is the time when you bounce barley grass.
You bounce barley grass. Certainly April, May is the time when you can't see barley grass, but it's the time when you need to spray it. So it's those areas that have seeded barley grass, when the little seedlings are almost impossible to see in the bottom, is the time to put your ethofumicate, your Nortron on, which will give you season-long control, and in fact, in the spring, any seedlings, it will control them too. It's reasonably residual. It's a wee bit hard on white clover, and you may have to re-drill some white clover into those
Barley grass
areas.
doesn't do anything for white clover either.
No, not at all, and doesn't do anything for animal pelts and wool and everything else.
Exactly.
We hate the stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thistles.
Thistles, February, March is the time for topping thistles. I'm talking particularly Californian thistle, where when you top it, you'll find that it's got a hollow stem leading into the ground. Well, the theory behind it is that you open up that hollow stem to water, to rain, to go down the stem, and to rot the thing out from the inside. Now that's assuming you get some rain or you've got irrigation to put on it. But the topping time for sort of a cultural control of Californian thistle is February, March, and we're fast running out of time, but the thistles are still there, so top them and allow them to be rotted out by moisture.
Exactly.
Yep.
Speaking of moisture, we don't have much of it around at the moment, but slugs is a winter problem.
Slugs is a winter problem, an autumn problem. When establishing young pasture and clovers, specialist vegetable crops, especially around the outside of the field, slugs will come in from the outside, and they might take the first 20, 30 metres of the field. So it's strategically, again, zipping around the outside of those paddocks with some slug bait can be very, very beneficial to the rest of the crop. Stops them in their tracks. They don't continue to ingress into the centre of your field if they're coming in from the outside.
And briefly, contracts.
Contracts, farmers really need to be in contact with their agents, the firms they deal with. Give them all the information. Give them the cropping histories, the paddock sizes, the fertility. Tell them what you want. They'll take it on board. They'll put it in their memoirs of when a contract comes out that's suitable. They'll have that information. They can shortcut and go to you. But unless they've got the information, they go searching and wasting time. So be proactive. Talk to your main men and give them the info. Tell them what you want. You mightn't always get it, but you've got to start somewhere.
You have to start somewhere. Dennis, thank you very much indeed. In just a moment, we'll be talking to a Northland farmer about how he is getting resilience into his pastures. Murray, Northland out at the Whangarei Heads, it's a challenging bit of land.
Yes, it can be at times of the year, Rob. It's coastal, can be dry, and also can have a serious amount of rain as well. So yeah, we are challenged, and we've got pastures that you don't see all around the countryside, which are more difficult to manage, and that's Kikuyu pastures. So
tell me about the property.
So the property is 550 hectares, of which 235 is dairy platform, and the rest is dairy support, and also we run a dairy beef operation, which we support from taking the calves from the dairy cows to Angus Jersey Cross and carry them through to finishing.
So you're spreading your risk?
Yeah, we have spread our risk, but we've also taken advantage of the quality Jersey Cross animal that come out of the dairy cows.
Good on you for using jerseys.
It's starting to pick up again. It's getting a bit of momentum again, but you know, they do provide a quality beef animal, and that's not highly recognised. Those that know the animal know that the beef quality that comes out of them and the finishing ability is a really good product.
Do you get a certain amount of marbling with that?
Yes, we are, yes, and AgResearch did some work a number of years ago, and they utilised some of our animals that looked at the marbling effect. So there is a bit of marbling. It's probably not as much as a Wagyu animal, which is specifically bred for that, but it's a really good balanced meat product.
Now, the rainfall, it's pretty varied.
Yeah, so generally we range from 650 mils of rain in a low year to 1100, 1200 in a wet year. So there is a range, and being in the north, we tend to get a little bit more subtropical flow. So particularly this year is an example where the weather patterns have brought more subtropical type flows, and our rain falls tend to be large dumps as opposed to spread evenly across the year. So our challenge is actually managing when the rain falls. So wet winters, dry summers generally, and with subtropical dumps.
And there's humidity.
And humidity, yes, there's a fair amount of that with that subtropical airflows, particularly an easterly pattern like we've had for the last 2 months. A lot of humidity, and which brings in itself flies, facial eczema challenges, bugs of various descriptions. So there's a number of challenges.
What sort of pasture do you use up here?
Yes, this is Kikuyu country, and obviously driving a per hectare performance is what we're looking for. So the Kikuyu does alter its growing points during the year. It doesn't grow during that early spring period very vigorously, where you're trying to feed a whole lot of newly calved cows. So we use a lot of Italian grasses to fill those holes, but then we use a summer cropping regime and a permanent pasture regime after that to put new varieties of pastures in to fill those gaps.
So what are you using?
Well, we started off using perennial ryegrass, the normal perennial ryegrass makeups of pastures, but we're finding they're not lasting. The Kikuyu reverts really quickly over the sort of 2 or 3 year period, and they don't cope with those drier points that we get. So we're looking at alternative species, and we've trended to more fescues and cocksfoots. We've used a little bit of lucerne in the last year, doing a bit of work around legumes. So we're trying to find a pasture that's going to be resilient in terms of those dry points and deeper rooting, and can make use of the moisture that's here and add with the Kikuyu. Yep.
I've sort of quietly smiled really, because you enjoyed the Seed Force range so much you ended up working with them.
That's right, it is ironic. We've been working them ever since they started, and I think this year it's 10 years since they've been in operation, and we've been involved for that 10 years. Initially as a trial farm in terms of putting some trials on, and on the seed basis, we've identified through those trials pastures that have actually grown really well here, and so we've pursued those varieties, and that's really important that we identify varieties that grow well in this environment. So from that basis, they provide a product that actually really does suit what we're looking for and suit what the animal's looking for. And we've also had a relationship through a sponsorship arrangement with my son's rally car for a number of years, which was very productive for both of us.
Palatability is just so important.
It's really important, and there are a number of varieties on the market that are just marketed through yield, and yield is one thing, but unless the animal that's eating them wants to eat them, and then can turn that into something productive, then you're really wasting your time. So Seed Force, one of their philosophies is that they are actually breeding plant varieties that are that the animal likes to eat and is productive. So that's important to us as well. We get tied up with persistence and having ryegrass species persisting longer, and some of those varieties are inflicted with various ranges of endophytes. endophytes, yes, they do protect them from insect damage and make them persistent, but some of the varieties are actually, the cows don't enjoy eating, and we've seen evidence of that, and so we've actually steered away from endophyte variety pastures for that reason, because the animals actually don't like eating them, and that's why they persist.
That's a very good sort of an idea. I hadn't thought it persists because they're not being eaten.
Yes, and it persists for two reasons. One is the animal refuses to eat lower than it needs to, and that allows the crown to still survive. But also we've seen evidence of some of the pastures, animals walking around and not wanting to eat it, and they're able to reseed, which allows them to continue to persist and stay in the environment. And that's, I suppose, why the purest wild endophyte is so persistent, in that it's actually not very palatable to an animal. So that's why it stays there. So in terms of plant breeding, I've identified endophytes that both protect from insects but also give that bit of a survival.
So finally, Murray, the industry where it is, I guess you're going to have to work smarter rather than harder.
Yeah, we're in a tough period of time at the moment. The world prices are under pressure, and commodity prices are under pressure with oversupply around the world. We need to be really smart in terms of, one, what we do on farm, to reinforce our pasture-based system to ensure that we're actually leveraging the most we can out of what we grow, and that's a little bit what we try to do in terms of the varieties and the species we plant. So we need to come back to the basic fundamentals, go back to our basic fundamentals on how we operate and what made us efficient in the first place. But also in terms of a marketing arm, we need to be smart in terms of capturing all the high value markets we can capture, and also protect our brand and market who we are and what we produce, as opposed to just be commodity traders on the market with everybody else.
In a lovely part of the world. In just a moment, we'll be talking farm accounting with Kerry Adams. I've been reporting on farming matters on the radio and newspapers and on television for 40 or so years, but communication, like farming, has moved on. So we've come up with On the Land, online and through YouTube on any screen, anytime and anywhere. Just push play and see and hear what's happening today in our rural community. You'll learn and be informed about the latest and best information farming matters. On the Land, bringing farming information into the 21st century. So join us on our website, ontheland.co.nz.
You know that saying, content is king? Well, in today's mixed media world, it's true. You need video, audio, photos and more for social media, for marketing, for communications, sales and for advertising. And you need this at a price that works with your budgets. Well, that's what we do. At Tandem, we partner with you to create the content that you can use to shout to the world or video link to a few. Connect with us and we'll help you connect to the world.
We're living on a planet facing almost insurmountable challenges. Challenges we have to face sooner rather than later. The world needs our energy. She needs our ideas, our passion. It's up to us to change things, make a positive change to the planet, to feed the world, to protect the future, to live well, to be the generation that will make a change. Join us.
Kerry, IRD, they're starting to cut some jobs down?
Yeah, they've just come out in the last few days saying as part of their business transformation process that they're going to be undergoing in 2018 to 21, they're going to cut about 1,500 odd jobs out of the department. They've said that it's going to be mainly sort of the admin and IT side of it, but there will be job cuts across the board, which is a bit of a concern because, you know, who are they going to cut? And hopefully it's not some of the more experienced ones where the knowledge is known, because we know with the call centre that the knowledge is not necessarily always there.
Is this because we're getting more mechanised and computerised?
Yeah, and they've got their new IT system coming up and they want to find some money basically to fund it. The government has said they're going to tip in so much and they're a little bit short, so this is one of the ways they're going to help fund it.
Yeah, 1,500 jobs, it's a lot, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's but if it's coming to sort of the admin head office area, it's probably a good thing. They have said that the regional centres and etc. they've got open are going to stay open. So that's good news for our farming clients. Hopefully they've still got someone nearby they can go and see, even though their offices are pretty rare around New Zealand.
You've always advocated talk to them, you know, so
yeah,
you do need the people to talk to.
You do indeed, yes. But as long as they keep some of that knowledge on board and keep it flowing through the organisation.
Now your legs will be a blur because they're coming towards the end of the year for most people.
Yeah, well obviously end of financial year's on very close. A lot of things to think about and to do. Some people still got tax returns to file. So obviously the first thing is to get those into your account and get them done because the deadline is 31 March and if you miss it, well, they're going to penalise you. So there's a few that have said, oh yeah, I'll hold off, well now's the time to get them in.
This is for last year's,
This is for the last year, yep.
Yeah.
So this is from almost 12 months ago basically.
Yep.
They still haven't got those in. They need to get those in. And they need to start thinking about livestock counts, make sure they've got those done. And they've got them aged and etc. They've got things like what sheep or beef etc. have you killed on the farm for themselves, the animals, all those details that your accountant will need, and which IRD will verify if they come and look at your books. So you've got to make sure they're all pretty close to what they are.
Yeah, because you do need to have a stock take, literally.
Yeah, you do. Yes. Yep. The onus is on you to do it, and you've got to prove that you've done it. A few years ago, we mentioned that IRD had a helicopter up around a farm doing a check on a farm. So they will go to that extreme if they think you really way out. So you've got to be up front. And some people start with their sharing tallies and sort of work from there. You can do that, but you've still got to make sure you count them. And you've got to age them because that aging is crucial to your final tax bill.
Oh, okay, because this is the 2-tooth, 4-tooth, full
Yep,
mouth.
all those sort of things. So, and they all got different values under the livestock options. So if you don't age them right, you may end up paying more tax than you have to.
How many times have you said, and Neville died before you, that you don't mess with the IRD because they're not idiots?
No, they know. And they've got stats that feed into behind their systems, and they've got trends on your farm. They've got trends within the industry. So, yeah, don't try and play too many tricks.
Well, you don't play any.
No, well, there's some legitimate things you can do that sort of allow you to move things around, but don't get too clever thinking, oh, I'm just going to do this and no one's ever going to know, because at some point it's going to catch up on you.
Yeah, and I've seen it happen, and you've seen it happen, and you've talked about people who've ended up as a guest to the Queen for some time.
Yeah, they pay a big price, and it could mean the end of everything for you. So yeah, play it safe and be up front.
Talk to your chartered accountant.
Definitely, yes.
Exactly. Now, equipment purchases, where are we at with those?
Yeah, a lot of people when they're sort of looking to buy plant and they're looking at the tax benefit side of things, if I buy a piece of plant, what's my write-off going to be? That shouldn't be your only focus. You should actually be thinking of other things like, what's it going to cost per hectare to run that machine, to finance it, etc., compared to what you've got now. And you should really be thinking about whether it's going to give you any more efficiency.
Efficiency, I mean, that's huge. I was talking to a dairy farmer not long ago, and he said that the big dairy farms, it's cheaper to have somebody on a four-wheel motorbike opening and closing the ribbons behind you and before you than for the person who's on the feeding wagon to stop, get off, do it, go through. Yep. We're getting that finely tuned.
Yeah, we need to. The farm returns are sort of up and down, so you want to make sure you keep your costs to a minimum, and so you've got to work out these sort of things. It takes time to do it, but if you do it right, the payback is there further down the track because you are getting a better return than what you would if you just suddenly just go out and buy a bigger tractor or something like that. Just because it looks good doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work better for you.
No, exactly.
And in some cases we've seen it where they've actually downgraded and it's had bigger dividends for them.
That comes right back into really sitting down with whoever's involved with the property plus their chartered accountant.
Yeah. So you should be
farm advisor.
Yeah, so everybody should be sitting around the table and saying, look, looking at the budget for a start to make sure you can actually afford something. If you can, what are we looking at buying? Why? What's it going to cost? What's our potential return? Do we really need it in the first place? Just because the neighbour got something doesn't mean you have to get it. And salesmen are pretty forceful. You do that final deal, so it's good to sit down and
the salesmen are on commission, Kerry.
Yes, yeah.
I love that sort of situation where invariably the women in the partnership will say, do you want it or do you need it?
Yes, and they're normally the one that has the voice of reason in the background. We like to get them involved where possible.
For that very reason?
Yeah, they don't just see a piece of metal that, I need it because everyone else has got it or it looks great. They can understand what's going on behind the scenes.
So the take-home message really is when you're looking at buying equipment, do you want it or do you need it?
Yes, definitely, yeah. And then you've also got to think about whether you're going to buy it outright or lease it. That's the other option to think about.
Kerry, thank you very much indeed. And if you'd like to have another listen to Kerry's interview or any of the others that are on the program, you can go to our website, ontheland.co.nz. I'm Rob Cope-Williams. You've either been watching or you have just missed the program, but it will be back at the same time next week. Until then, bye now.